I'm Carolyn Hartley, 34 years old, and the day I walked into my father-in-law's kitchen with a grocery store cake and a hopeful heart, I found him alone eating cold pizza off a paper towel, while the people who were supposed to love him laughed on a beach in Hawaii. They left him on his birthday, said he wouldn't notice, said I could babysit the cripple. But when I turned around, Charles stood up from his wheelchair and said just one thing: "It's showtime. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're listening from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever stayed behind just to clean up someone else's mess." It was just before 5 when I pulled up to the house on Sycamore Court, engine ticking in the damp October air. I sat there a moment, one hand on the steering wheel, the other steadying a sheet cake on the passenger seat. The card tucked underneath had been signed 3 times, never quite sure how to address a man who once called me kiddo, but hadn't looked me in the eye since his stroke. I kept telling myself they'd be late, maybe stuck in traffic from Houston. But deep down, I already knew they weren't coming. I used the key Charles had given me back in the spring. The entryway smelled like lemon candles and something just barely like bleach, the same scent Darlene always used after one of her long lectures about clean baseboards and proper etiquette. The silence stretched thin across the walls. No banner, no music, no voices drifting from the kitchen or hallway. Just the hum of the fridge and the echo of my own shoes on the tile. I set the cake down on the side table and ran my fingers across the plastic lid. My mama would have had streamers and cornbread in the oven by now, even if she was mad at you. That's just how I was raised. Kindness didn't need to be earned. I walked through the hallway past the dusty photo frames and stiff-backed chairs. In the kitchen, Charles sat in his wheelchair near the island. A single slice of pepperoni pizza rested beside him, already cold and curling at the edges. No napkin, no plate, just paper towel and silence. His eyes met mine and stayed there. "Hi, Dad," I said quiet, like I might scare him. I didn't ask where the others were. I already knew. I busied my hands cake on the counter candles from the junk drawer matches. It was easier to light a candle than to sit in that silence with him. That's when my phone lit up Avery's name flashing across the screen. I answered. Sunset filled the frame, waves crashing. My husband leaned back against a tiki bar, some pink drink sweating in his hand. Darlene leaned in beside him with a flower in her hair like they were posing for a postcard. "Oh, good," she said. The nurse showed up. Avery chuckled. "Just prop him up and try not to break anything. He won't even know it's his birthday." Their laughter rang through the speaker. Charles didn't say a word, but his jaw clenched hard enough to shake. I didn't speak. I just ended the call and placed the phone face down. I reached for a napkin and tucked it over the pizza slice like it mattered. I didn't know what else to do. And that's when the chair creaked. That's when I turned around and saw a man everyone thought was broken begin to rise. Charles's blanket had slipped from his lap. One foot, then the other, eased down onto the tile. His legs trembled, and for a second I couldn't tell if he was about to fall or fly. He gripped the armrests and pushed himself upright, every inch, slow, deliberate, like he was lifting not just his own weight, but the burden everyone had laid on him for months. He stood. Frail, yes, but steady. My breath caught. I hadn't seen him on his feet since before the stroke. He held the pose just long enough to make sure I was watching, then eased himself back down and adjusted the blanket with careful fingers. "Walk is generous," he said, catching his breath. "Shuffle is closer." "But it's enough." I crouched down in front of him, still trying to make sense of what I'd seen. He gave a small shrug, almost embarrassed, and said it had started over the summer 10 seconds at a time, usually when they were out of the house. He added 5 more each week. He said he kept the tremor going on purpose, said it made them underestimate him. I didn't speak right away. I was still sorting through the last few months, the sedatives Lauren claimed he needed, the physical therapy appointments she always canceled, the guest room Avery took over for his workouts, since, as he put it, Dad didn't need the space anymore. "They've been milking this," I said quietly. Charles nodded once, then reached to the bookcase beside him and pressed a hidden latch. A narrow drawer slid out from beneath the shelf, revealing a weathered accordion folder and a flash drive tucked on top. He looked over at me. I recorded everything he said. Hidden cam in the garage, baby monitor in my room, phone calls, doctor visits. Even last night, Avery bragging about changing my IRA while sipping a Mai Tai. He handed the folder to me. It was heavier than it looked. Inside were bank statements, printed emails, charts marked in red, and letters revoking Lauren's power of attorney, all notarized, all signed months ago. Charles's voice stayed low, steady. If they knew I could stand, they'd have me packed off to a care facility by morning. Easier to drain accounts when the old man isn't around to ask questions. I laid the folder on the table and stood there, hands resting on its edges, pulse ticking in my ears. He looked at me, not asking, not telling, just waiting. "They used both of us," I said. "The miscarriage, the appointments, the quiet little insults." He nodded again. "Kindness without backbone," he said, "gets trampled. I've asked too much silence from you already." I didn't reply. I just ran my finger along the edge of the folder and then reached for my phone. 3 messages from Avery. "Where'd you put Dad's meds? Cake good. Send a pic of the old man for the gram babe." I powered the phone off and placed it screen down on the counter. Outside, the light was slipping toward evening. The street lights had started to buzz, faintly casting orange pools across the sidewalk. I helped Charles into the living room and made sure the baby monitor was still blinking red. It was still recording. He nodded his approval. I locked the drawer and slid the chair under the table, pressing the edge in until it clicked softly. Halfway home, a voicemail flashed on my dash. Avery again, voice tight, suspicious. I didn't listen. When I got back to my apartment, I sat in the car for a long time. I didn't go inside right away. The grocery bag with the paper plates and candles was still on the floorboard untouched. I looked at it, then at the sky, then back at my hands. I'd done everything right for so long. Showed up, stayed quiet, tried to make things work. But none of that had changed who they were, and tonight proved it never would. The next morning, I didn't wait for permission. I packed a bag and drove straight back to Charles's house before sunrise. He was waiting at the door in his robe, upright, leaning lightly on the doorframe. No small talk, just a nod toward the garage and a short instruction, "We'll need a step stool." The garage was dim and cold, the air full of dust and old fuel. Fluorescent lights flickered on overhead. I hadn't been allowed in here much. Avery said it was his space, said it was too dangerous for me to be messing around in. Charles guided me to a far wall and tapped on a seam I'd never noticed. "False panel," he whispered. "Push up. Slide over." I climbed the stool, hands brushing against insulation and splinters. A small lockbox thunked into my palms. Inside were 3 palm-sized cameras and a battered external hard drive. Charles watched as I opened it, his arms folded. They forgot one thing he said. I was trained to document enemy movement. We carried everything to the basement. It was cold down there and quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in places no one visits. Dust covered the desk. Old tax folders were stacked beside a rusted file cabinet. I plugged the drive into the computer. The system was ancient, but it loaded. A folder opened across the screen, rows of clips labeled with dates and times. Charles stood behind me. "Try June 12th, he said. I clicked. Lauren's voice, scratchy but unmistakable, crackled through the speakers. "If he drops dead before July, I swear I'll take a cruise in his honor." I didn't look at him, just clicked the next one. Avery leaning close to the wheelchair. Stay alive till the refinance clears, old man. After that, no promises. We sat in silence for a long time. Another video. This one in the garage. Avery drinking a beer, bragging about taking Charles off the debit card. She's useful, he said, meaning me. Picks up prescriptions, keeps the lights on. But once we move him to Meadowbrook, we ghost her. Simple. I pushed back from the desk and stood, fists clenched at my sides. I could still hear Charles behind me, breathing slow and steady. They strip us piece by piece, he said. First dignity, then memory, then money. He opened the desk drawer and pulled out a ring of old keys. There's more, he said. Upstairs, documents, transfers, names. I took the keys and climbed to the attic. It smelled like cedar and old papers. The sun came in through a tiny vent dust spinning in the light. I found the cabinet wedged behind boxes. The drawer stuck but gave way. Inside folders yellowed with time corners curled. I opened the first one. Amendment, beneficiary change. I flipped through the pages. Legal signature, notarized, 6 months ago. My name, me. I sat there for a long moment. No one else in the house but Charles downstairs waiting. From the cabinet came one more folder, thinner, just a page and a note. If you're reading this, it means I still trust you. Not because you're perfect, because you never treated me like I was less than human. Show them. Let them choke on the truth. I folded the letter and stood. Dust clung to my jeans, but I didn't brush it off. Back downstairs, Charles was waiting by the window. I handed him the folder. He looked at the front page, eyes scanning the names. I thought they'd burned this, he said. They found the bedroom copy, I replied. Not this one. His voice was quiet. They tried to make me change it, said they'd cut off food, cut off care, said I was a burden. I was still in my right mind. I knew who'd show up. I didn't speak, just reached for a glass of water and set it beside him. The clock on the wall read 2:17 p.m. We both knew this wasn't over. The attic smelled like dust and old cedar. I sat on the wooden floorboards with the folder in my lap, its edges softened from years of being handled. The legal documents were neatly bound, the notary seal still visible in the corner. My name filled the beneficiary line, clear, direct, unmistakable. Tucked behind those pages was a handwritten note creased and folded into fourths. The ink had bled slightly at the corners, like it had waited too long to be read. If you're reading this, it began, it means I still trust you. Not because you're perfect, because you never treated me like I was less than human. If I fall silent, if something happens, this is your light. Show it to them. Let them choke on the truth. I folded the letter and placed it back inside the folder. The light coming through the attic vent was thin and golden, full of floating dust. I stayed there longer than I planned, listening to the house breathe around me. The creaks in the beams, the quiet groan of air through the ductwork. I didn't hear anyone call my name, but I knew Charles was downstairs waiting. When I stepped off the attic ladder, I moved slowly. Each rung felt like a decision. The folder was tucked under my arm, and I held it tight the way you'd carry something fragile but important. Charles was in the kitchen, his chair turned toward the open window. The breeze lifted the corner of the newspaper on his lap. He looked up as I entered, eyes scanning the folder before I even handed it over. He took one look at the top page, then closed his eyes for a long moment. I thought they might have burned it, he said quietly. They found the copy I kept in the bedroom safe, tore it up. But not this one. I sat across from him at the table. They tried to make you change it, I asked. His voice stayed low. Threatened to pull the nurse. Said they'd stop bringing food. Called me a dictator. Said I was being selfish. But I was still in my right mind. I knew what I was doing. And I knew who'd keep showing up. The kitchen clock ticked in the background. A quiet, steady sound. Behind him, the cabinet door opened with a soft click. He wheeled over, pressed on the edge of a panel, and pulled out a slim folder I hadn't seen before. "If I die," he said, handing it to me, "you have first right to buy this house. $1. Already notarized. They don't know it exists." I flipped through the page. The language was clear, the date recent. I looked at him. "Why me?" He adjusted the cuffs on his shirt. "Because you made this house feel alive again, and they've mocked you for too long." I didn't answer right away. I held the folder, reading the line again. It didn't feel real, not yet. "I never wanted any of this." I said more to the space around us than to him. "Wanting it isn't the point," he replied. "Understanding why they hate you is—" His words landed with a quiet weight, the kind that settles in your chest before your mind catches up. We stayed at the table while the afternoon sun moved across the laminate in long strips. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon from a candle that had burned out the night before. The amended will and the house deed lay between us, edges held down by a chipped mug. The folder felt heavier now, but it wasn't fear making my hands shake, it was purpose. "We do this by the book," I said finally. "No shortcuts, nothing they can twist." Charles nodded. "Then fetch the brown notebook from my office," he said. "Bottom drawer, left-hand side." The office was quiet. It smelled like typewriter ink and old paper. I found the notebook under a stack of dog-eared manuals, the initials embossed in fading gold. Inside the front cover, one number had been written twice, once in black ink, once in pencil. I brought it back to the kitchen and dialed. A low voice answered on the first ring. "Halpern." "This is Caroline Hartley," I said. "Charles told me you might be expecting my call." A pause. Then warmth. "Ah," the man said, "the daughter-in-law who still shows up. Put my old friend on, would you?" Charles took the phone. Their conversation drifted through a code of shared history, mentions of hearings, a fishing trip, and something about a VA appeal. When he handed the phone back to me, the tone shifted. "I filed that will the week Charles signed it," Halpern said. "County records are sealed. More importantly, I hold the original trust from '09. If a doctor clears Charles to manage his affairs, full authority reverts to him, and by extension to you as his agent. I'll be driving up tomorrow with certified copies." The line clicked off. Charles rolled toward the pantry cabinet and reached behind a row of canned peaches. A small safe clicked open. Inside were bundles of paperwork, insurance brokerage accounts, and a new power of attorney signed 3 months after the stroke. Beneath the files sat a photo. Our wedding day, Charles in uniform, Avery stiff beside me. Darlene half turned from the camera. "They framed their own copy," Charles said. "Cropped me out. I kept the real one." I looked at the photo, at the sharpness in his gaze, and the way his hand rested on my shoulder. There'd been no pretending that day. "They've been rewriting the story for years," I said. He didn't answer, just nodded toward the folder still sitting between us. "Time we hand them the real script," I said. By dusk, the house had gone quiet again. We made coffee not because we needed it, but because the warmth helped us keep moving. Charles labeled the folders in his exact military print. We sorted documents into stacks, assets records, forged requests. I scanned every page and emailed them to myself, to his cloud, and to Halpern. The grandfather clock chimed 8:30. I had just slipped the last document into a banker's box when the landline rang. Charles glanced at the caller ID. "Avery," he said. "Answer it. On speaker." I hesitated, then pressed the button. Wind in the background. Glasses clinking. Avery's voice too loud, a little slurred. "Dad. Marina. You two having a cozy little evening." He laughed. Then louder. "Hey, my debit card's not working." "Care to explain?" Charles nodded at the phone. I pressed the speaker button. "Hey there, birthday boy," Avery said. "You and the maid cut the cake yet?" Lauren's voice chimed in shrill with laughter. Maybe she lit a candle on the pizza slice I didn't speak. I let them keep talking. Let them think they were still in control. Then Charles leaned forward and spoke calm, clear, and far too steady for their comfort. "Hello, son." The line fell silent. Dad Avery's voice dropped. "You're, standing. That's not your concern," Charles said. "But your inheritance, that might be." Lauren jumped in, fast panic already climbing in her voice. "This is manipulation. Marina's brainwashing you." I opened the folder beside me. "Actually, I said I'm executing the responsibilities given to me under a durable power of attorney signed and notarized 6 months ago. The attorney of record is Mr. Jacob Halpern." Silence. "You're not even family," Avery said. "According to the will your mother never told you about," I replied. "I'm the only one listed as successor trustee." Charles didn't flinch. His eyes were steady, like he'd waited years for this moment. And I knew this was only the beginning. In the morning, the real storm would start. The call ended with a hollow click, but the sound hung in the room like smoke. Charles didn't say anything. He leaned back slowly, one hand resting on the arm of his chair, the other gripping the edge of the table. The air between us had shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just different settled. He pushed himself upright, using the cane. His movements were slower now, but every step held purpose. I followed him down the hallway. We passed the crooked family portrait dust beginning to gather in the corners of the frame and turned toward the kitchen. He didn't stop, just kept walking until he reached the narrow stairwell tucked behind the pantry. "They never came up here," he said quietly, his hand resting on the banister. "Too busy making plans to bury me." We climbed the attic stairs. The boards creaked under our weight. The light overhead buzzed when Charles pulled the chain, and a single bulb lit the space in a warm, pale circle. The smell up there was dry wood, old boxes, and time. The quiet was deeper, too, like it had learned to keep secrets. We moved slowly, box by box. Most held the usual things: tax folders, photo albums, old greeting cards. But in a flat, unmarked bin beneath a folded quilt, Charles pulled out a leather binder with cracked edges. Inside were legal documents, dozens of them, some with typewritten entries, others in longhand. We sat on a pair of storage trunks as I flipped through them. The original trust, untouched, still valid. Charles's signature clear as day. Transfers, deeds, account movements all mapped out. And then, near the back pages with forged signatures. The handwriting was shaky, but it didn't match Charles's. It matched Lauren's. He didn't react, not with surprise, just a tightening of his mouth. They said I was forgetting things he said, so I let them think I was. The more they thought I didn't notice, the sloppier they got. He knelt beside another box and opened a faded composition notebook. Inside, line after line, had been filled transactions, names, dates. Every time Lauren or Avery took something, he had written it down. Even the small things, gift cards, antique vases, payments made to themselves from his accounts. They laughed when I started using sticky notes, he said I was losing it. But those were just decoys. The real records, those stayed up here. I scanned a few of the pages and began taking photos with my phone, backing up everything to multiple places. Charles directed me to a cloud folder he'd kept active under a separate account. He had planned more than I'd realized. Nothing was done in panic. Every step had been slow, precise, waiting for the right moment. That afternoon, we drove out to see Mr. Redmond, the family lawyer. His office was just past the town square, tucked between an insurance agency and a bookstore that never seemed to change its window display. He greeted us at the door himself and showed us into a small conference room. He was a quiet man, steady older than Charles by a few years. He listened more than he spoke. As he began reading through the binder, his expression changed. At first he looked puzzled, then grim. "This wasn't just mishandling," he said. "This is fraud, forgery, elder abuse, possibly even conspiracy to defraud a trust." He set the pages down carefully and looked at Charles, then at me. "You still have full authority under the power of attorney from the spring," he said. "That means you can act now." We spent the next hour drafting legal orders, freezing asset transfers, filing notices to halt any further withdrawals, placing liens on real estate records, and scheduling a formal audit of recent sales. I typed as Mr. Redmond dictated, and Charles reviewed every line before signing. When we got to the list of antique items removed from the vacation home, I added a reversal notice to each one citing the terms of the irrevocable trust. It was nearly dark when we returned to the house. Charles moved slower than before, and I could see the effort it had taken to get through the day. Still, he kept going. In his study, he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and reached behind the sliding panel. A click. A manila folder emerged different from the others. Newer, thicker paper. He didn't open it. "This," he said, handing it to me, "is what they'll never expect." I held the folder. It felt heavy, but not from its weight. "What is it?" I asked. He looked at me, tired but sure. "You'll deliver it when the time comes." That night, I didn't go back to my apartment. We ate dinner in the kitchen, just the two of us. Nothing fancy leftovers heated on real plates, glasses of sweet tea poured from a pitcher he hadn't used in months. No one rushed. No one criticized. Just the sound of forks, the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the quiet return of something that had been missing for a long time. After dishes were rinsed and put away, Charles rolled a small cedar chest from the hallway and opened it on the living room rug. Inside was a photo album. One Darlene had tried to throw away more than once, now dusted off and whole. He flipped to a page near the middle. A Polaroid, him and my late husband, beside a fishing boat, both of them sunburned and smiling. Another photo showed me holding a small bass like it was some kind of trophy. Charles tapped that one. "I kept this because you looked genuinely happy," he said, and so did he. I stared at the image for a while, trying to remember what it had felt like. That trip had taken place 2 summers before the stroke. Before grief turned Avery's teasing sharp, and Darlene's glances into cold assessments. Charles slid the album toward me. "This legacy isn't cash," he said. "It's choosing who gets a seat at the table. Money just pays for the chairs." I nodded. We moved to the office once more, where new documents waited for signature drafts for the Calhoun Foundation. Halpern had drawn up bylaws. I'd written the mission statement by hand. Support for family caregivers, legal resources, small grants for respite care. Charles initialed each page one by one with hands that barely shook. Outside porch lights clicked on across the neighborhood, curtains closed, families finished their dinners. Somewhere across town, Avery was likely pacing with a glass in his hand, trying to decide his next move. Lauren probably still yelling. But none of that touched this house tonight. I stood at the window and looked out across the lawn Avery once promised to resod. It never happened. Maybe I plant lavender next spring. Behind me, Charles spoke one last time before turning in for the night. "Blood doesn't prove love," he said. "Presence does." I didn't answer, just watched the light settle across the porch. We had everything we needed. What came next was theirs to hear, and we weren't going to whisper it. The next morning I woke before the sun. The house was quiet, still wrapped in that early hush where nothing's quite real yet. I stood in the hallway outside Charles's room for a moment, just listening. Then I turned on the coffee pot and watched the light blink as it heated. We had one full day before Avery and Lauren's return flight landed. Just enough time if we moved steady. Charles met me at the table, a fresh button-down pulled over his undershirt, the same cane resting against his chair. He didn't wait for breakfast. "Garage," he said. We need to finish this. The air outside was crisp, sky still pink with morning. I unlocked the garage and flipped on the lights. Cobwebs hung from the rafters, and the old smell of gasoline clung to the corners. Charles walked me to the far wall again, this time pointing higher. "You'll need the ladder," he said. I climbed carefully, reaching toward the false ceiling panel. The plaster gave way with a soft snap, and a small lockbox dropped into my hands. Inside were 3 cameras, lightweight, palm-sized, along with a scratched-up external hard drive. They forgot one thing, Charles said from below. I was trained to document enemy movement. We brought everything back to the basement, the room Lauren always called the dungeon. The air was dry and still. I booted up the old desktop while Charles settled beside me, flipping through his notes. Footage loaded slowly. Each file was labeled with a date and time. I clicked through one by one. June 12th. Lauren's voice. "If he drops dead before July, I swear I'll take a cruise in his honor." August 9th. Avery leaning over Charles's chair whispering, "Stay alive till the refinance clears." After that, no promises. October 2nd. The garage. Avery holding a beer laughing. She's useful, picks up his pills, pays the bills. But once we move him to Meadowbrook, we ghost her. Simple. My hand stayed on the keyboard, but my fingers curled slightly. Charles watched quietly. "They strip you down piece by piece," he said. "First dignity, then memory, then money." I nodded. "We've got proof, but we'll need more." He didn't hesitate. Opened the desk drawer and pulled out a ring of old keys. "There's more upstairs. Files I hid before the handwriting got bad. You'll know what matters when you see it." I took the keys and headed up. The attic air was warmer now, late morning sun pressing in through the vents. I found the cabinet tucked behind 2 old suitcases. The middle drawer stuck halfway, groaning against its track. Inside the folders were the color of parchment. I pulled one out and flipped it open. Amendment, beneficiary change. My name again, in Charles's clear, unmistakable script. The document was signed, notarized, dated 6 months ago. Beneath it lay a single sheet of lined paper folded once. The handwriting was smaller, more personal. "If anything happens to me, if I fall silent, this document is your light." I slid everything carefully back into the folder and pressed it to my chest. Downstairs, Charles was still in the kitchen, his eyes on the backyard through the window. I handed him the folder. He opened it, scanned the first page, and leaned back. "They found the bedroom copy," he said, "ripped it up, called me a burden, told me I was too old to know what I was doing." He turned to me, but I was clear. I knew who showed up, even when they didn't. The room was still. The refrigerator hummed. I poured him a glass of water, and we sat for a while without speaking. Then, without prompting, Charles rolled to the wall cabinet and opened another hidden panel. A single page slid out. "If I die," he said, "you have first right to buy this house. $1. It's notarized. They never saw it." I took the paper and read it twice. The wording was exact, the clause tight. "I never wanted this," I said. "It's not about want," he replied. "It's about why they hate you." I nodded once and folded the paper into the legal folder. That afternoon, we returned to the living room. I scanned every document and backed up the files to 3 separate locations. I emailed copies to Mr. Redmond and printed hard duplicates for Halpern. At 2 Hizra sharp, I called Halpern's office. He answered on the second ring. "We're in position," I told him. "Everything's secure." "Good," he said. "Then I'll file the motion for notice of intent and meet you in court." Charles leaned back in his chair, watching the light shift across the room. I gathered everything into a single organized binder and slipped it into the leather satchel Charles had once used for VA paperwork. The next step was ours, and they wouldn't see it coming. We ended the day by preparing one last file sealed, stamped, and ready to be placed directly in the judge's hands. Charles didn't say what was inside, only that it mattered. "You'll know when to give it," he said, "but you're the one who has to do it." I nodded. That night, I set the folder on the table and poured 2 mugs of tea. We didn't speak much after that. There was nothing left to plan. By morning, the stage would be set, and the truth once told wouldn't be undone. The courtroom wasn't large, but the silence inside it felt heavier than walls twice as high. I walked in with the sealed folder pressed against my chest, Charles's handwriting just beneath the envelope's edge. The marble underfoot echoed with each step. Avery and Lauren were already seated near the front side. By side, their expressions unreadable at first. Avery leaned back in his chair, arms folded. Lauren was whispering something to their attorney, a man I hadn't seen before who gave me a glance that didn't last long. I approached the clerk and handed over the folder Charles had prepared. He gave a nod and carried it straight to the judge's bench. She was already flipping through a stack of motions, but when the seal broke and the first page slid into view, her eyes paused. "Proceeding to supplemental document review," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Submitted by party Marina Hartley, acting with authorization from the primary testator, Mr. Charles L. Calhoun." I moved to the second row and sat. The folder stayed open now, passed from clerk to judge, page to page. On the third document, the judge leaned in closer. "All named heirs shall forfeit claim to any estate distribution, financial or material, if they fail to demonstrate continued moral fitness." She read aloud, her voice level but sharp. "Absence from key family events, malicious neglect or abandonment of duty constitutes cause for disinheritance." The room stayed still, the words trailing off into the silence that followed. A woman sitting behind me let out a small gasp. One of the local reporters shifted in his chairpen, frozen mid-sentence. Then Lauren's voice cut through high and strained. "That's not valid." He was confused. "Manipulated." The judge didn't even look up. "The amendment predates your claim, and we have a video deposition time-stamped 3 days ago." A screen was wheeled forward. The lights dimmed slightly as the video loaded. There, sitting upright in his wheelchair, was Charles. His voice came through clearly steady despite the rasp. "They left me alone on my birthday," he said. "Mocked me from a beach while I sat with cold pizza. That's not love. That's cruelty." The screen faded to black. I didn't look at Avery or Lauren. I looked straight ahead. Charles was in the gallery, seated near the rear. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just sat with both hands on the armrests watching. The judge turned back to the bench. "Any further rebuttal before we continue?" Lauren opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. I passed forward another document, photos. Dated, time-stamped. Lauren and Avery poolside in Maui, drinks in hand, smiling for the camera. The same hour, Charles had been sitting alone in his kitchen, waiting for someone to remember it was his birthday. The judge reviewed the images, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded for the final piece. A flash drive was inserted into the courtroom monitor. Another clip appeared, older footage. Charles younger, sitting beside his former caregiver. "This clause," he said, gesturing to a printed document, "is for protection. Not for me. For the name. For the family it's supposed to mean something to." He looked directly into the camera. "They don't get to wear the Calhoun name like a jacket they only pull out for the holidays." The screen went dark again. I felt my pulse in my throat, but I kept still. Avery stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor. "You," he said, pointing across the room. "You did this. You tricked him. You're not family." The judge raised her hand, but he kept going. "You manipulated everything. She's nothing but a nurse with an agenda." I stood and reached for the final page I had brought. It was printed from his own account. Avery's flight itinerary, social media posts, One in particular, a photo captioned, "No cripples allowed." The judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Under the conditions of this amended clause, she said, inheritance rights are revoked effective immediately for Miss Lauren Calhoun and Mr. Avery Calhoun. Lauren let out a short, breathless sob. Avery just stood there frozen. "The entirety of the Calhoun estate, liquid, fixed, and intellectual, shall be transferred to the sole named trustee." The judge looked at me. "Do you accept what has been entrusted to you?" I glanced at Charles. He didn't need to say anything. I found my voice. "Yes," I said. "I do." The judge brought the gavel down with a single clean strike. The sound was quiet compared to the moment it marked. Avery stormed out first. Shoulders, tight mouth moving, but no one followed. Lauren sat longer. Her attorney was already gathering files in silence. Behind me, a court officer stepped forward to clear the aisle. Charles didn't use the wheelchair this time. He rose with the help of his cane and walked slowly, carefully toward the door. Every head turned as he passed. We stepped outside together. The afternoon sun felt different now, warmer somehow. The courthouse lawn was quiet, just a few people lingering in disbelief. Back at the house, the porch lights had just started to come on. I reheated leftovers from the day before and poured 2 glasses of sweet tea. Charles sat at the table, the head seat. No one corrected him. "First hot meal I've had in this house in months," he said softly, "and no one calling it a waste." We didn't say much after that, just ate. Let the quiet mean something again. The storm had passed, but the house still stood, and in it, something new was taking shape. The next morning we would begin sorting through what remained, but that night we let the silence hold. The sun hadn't fully risen when I stepped onto the porch the next morning. The air was still and cool, with just the faintest scent of dew rising from the lawn. Charles was already at the kitchen table, flipping through a notebook, glasses perched on the end of his nose. The same one he'd carried through most of his service years, judging by the wear on the corners. We worked quietly. There were bank documents to organize, medical statements to file, emails from Halpern, confirming transfers and deed recordings. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like restoration, piece by piece, returning what had been taken. Not just money or property, but peace, authority, the right to breathe freely in a house without having to explain your place in it. By mid-morning, we'd cleared out the filing cabinet in the office. Charles rolled back in his chair and tapped the edge of the desk. "They'll appeal," he said, "but it won't matter." I nodded. "Let them try." He reached for a padded envelope from the side drawer. Inside were the final items, titles, letters from his old law firm, and the trust summary Halpern had updated last week. "They still think it's about the house," he added, "about inheritance. But this—" He tapped the folder. "This is about the name." That afternoon, we prepared the official statement for the Calhoun Foundation. I typed while Charles dictated. His voice wasn't strong, but it was clear. We outlined the mission, the eligibility criteria, and how grants would be distributed. He wanted it in writing that the foundation would offer legal aid to caregivers left unsupported by family, with options for those navigating medical fraud or power of attorney disputes. We added a short introduction, nothing flashy, just Charles speaking plainly into a small camera. We filmed it from the dining room table, the same spot where he'd once eaten pizza alone on his birthday. He cleared his throat before we started, then spoke straight into the lens. "My name is Charles Calhoun," he said. "I've worn this name for 80 years. I watched what others did to it. I decided that ends now." We uploaded the clip to the Foundation's website and scheduled the official launch for the end of the month. Just before dinner, Halpern's courier arrived with the final court documentation, stamped, filed, recorded in the state register. The trust was fully transferred. The power of attorney was uncontested. The deed was clean. Charles opened the last envelope with quiet hands. Inside was a photo. An old one. He passed it to me. My late husband stood beside a fishing boat, one hand on Charles's shoulder. I was in the frame, too barefoot in the sand, holding up a red snapper like I'd won something. Everyone was smiling, and none of it looked forced. They framed their own copy, he said, but they cropped me out. This is the real one. I slid the picture back into its sleeve and set it gently inside the cedar box we'd moved to the living room. The past could stay there intact, but no longer leading the way. Later that night, after dinner, Charles rolled to the window and watched the streetlights flicker on. "They'll come back," he said. "Eventually. People like that always do." "I know," I said. He turned from the glass and looked at me. "But now we don't have to answer the door." I gathered the final folders and labeled them by hand, one for the foundation, one for the trust, one for the property. I placed them in the drawer next to the grandfather clock, locking it quietly behind me. That evening I prepared 2 mugs of herbal tea and placed them beside a fresh stack of mail. The silence was no longer heavy. It was restful, like the house had finally exhaled. Before heading upstairs, I set one extra place at the table. No plate, just a chair facing the one Charles always sat in. Not because anyone was coming, but because someone might. And we were no longer the ones being forgotten. The morning after the foundation launch, I stood in the doorway of the dining room and just looked. The sunlight was soft across the table, catching on the rim of the china we'd used the night before. The extra chair was still there, empty, but not forgotten. A quiet place for reflection, or maybe for someone still trying to find their way back. Charles had already finished his tea. He sat near the window, thumbing through the final legal packet Halpern had dropped off. His cane rested beside him untouched for the moment. He didn't say much, just turned one page, then another, then finally closed the folder and looked at me. "It's done," he said. And it was. There would be no more letters from Lauren's attorneys, no more voicemails from Avery filled with half-threats and hollow promises. The appeals were dismissed, the accounts secured, the trust, the house, the foundation all placed where they were meant to be, not out of revenge, but because someone had to stop the story from being rewritten again. Later that afternoon, we sat together on the back porch, the kind of still day where the breeze just barely moves the tree branches. The neighborhood was quiet, except for a few dogs barking in the distance and the soft sound of a lawnmower somewhere up the road. Charles leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, listening. "You know," he said, "I thought it would feel different. Winning, I mean." I nodded but didn't speak. He looked out over the yard. "Turns out, it doesn't feel like a win. Just feels like peace." And that was enough. That evening I went through the last of the photos in the cedar chest. Most were black and white faces. I didn't know names I'd only heard once or twice. I labeled each one in pencil and slipped them into protective sleeves. Some stories don't need to be spoken again, but they deserve to be kept. Before bed, I placed one final item in the foundation's files, a printed note Charles had written in his old military shorthand, the kind only a few people could still read. It simply said, "Presence over promise. Every time." I turned off the lights and checked the front lock one last time. The hallway was quiet, the grandfather clock steady in its rhythm. I stood there for a while, hand on the railing, and let the stillness settle. We'd gone through every paper, every account, every file folder full of hidden truths and half-buried names. But in the end, it wasn't the documents that mattered most. It was the promise unspoken, but held that no one would be left behind again just because they couldn't speak up. That night, I left the extra chair at the table just where it was. Not because I was waiting, but because I understood now some people arrive late to understanding. And when they do, they shouldn't have to knock twice. If you've ever carried someone through a season when they couldn't stand for themselves, I hope you know it mattered. And if you've ever stayed when others walked away, I hope you know that wasn't weakness. That was strength. Thank you for listening. And if this story reminded you of someone or of something you've lived through, I'd love to hear your story too. You're welcome to share it in the comments below.